by John Mannion, Democratic candidate for state Senate in the 50th District. It seems just a couple hours ago I was doing this with another candidate, Dia Carbajal. So, John, thanks so much for joining me this evening.
Robert, thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for everything you do, keeping our political world relevant and our citizens informed. I appreciate it.
For sure. Happy to do it. So wanted to start with the topic that I think is on everyone's mind, and that's COVID-19. And certainly we're dealing with the effects of it still. In terms of the health side of it. There's also certainly an economic impact to all this. But I wanted to start with the health. I before coming on here, received the latest report from Cayuga County that we have 22 new cases, including 13 just today. So this is very much a growing problem for us here. After months where there were a couple spikes, but then things kind of leveled off, and then here we are in October, and we have quite a growing problem on our hands. So what I wanted to ask you on the health side is, in terms of the state's role, because certainly there's a question of resources, whether it's money or supplies. What do you think the state needs to continue to do or needs to do to help places like Cayuga and Onondaga counties deal with the health effects of this virus?
Yeah, well, there's a lot going on there. Of course, I have to say a couple things about the pandemic here that we're in. I am an advanced placement biology and chemistry teacher, and have been for a long time. This is my 28th year teaching. So on February 3rd, we came back from a midterm break, and in my biology classes, I actually talked about a level of likeliness that we would break away because this virus is, number one, contagious, and number two, lethal, beyond a lot of the other viruses that we've had to deal with. And it's a novel virus, which means it's brand new. It's an emerging virus. So I am happy that I live in New York State. I'm happy that I live in Central New York. Number one, I think we have strong leadership here. Number two, I think we have excellent healthcare institutions and systems in place to make sure that we handle this, in a smart way. And we have. In speaking to what you're talking about, what's occurring in Cayuga County, I'm a teacher, so I am a biology teacher. So I think I understand the science of how viruses spread and human immunity. But we're doing something now that, we might look back in 3 or 4 years and say, we had to do it now. We had to get these kids back in a classroom. And we do. Our kids, there's no substitute for in-person learning. We just have to do it safely. But we will look back and go, either this was a good time or it wasn't. I know this, people are trying to be safe, and still the virus numbers are increasing, and it has to do with congregating and being indoors. So what can the state provide was your question. And I think, first of all, the state has provided a guidance. The governor people can be critical of the governor, but I will say this about him. I'm glad he's in this position, because we have needed actions at certain times, and they have been swift and decisive, and science has been applied. So I think there's sometimes frustration with certain communities within the business world that wanted to be open sooner. But like what we're seeing, if we push too far, the economic impact down the road could be much worse. I will say, I got a few more things to say about that, but I don't want to eat up all the time. And I would say, let's jump to what the state can do. The state can continue to provide guidance. We can continue to let the experts make the decisions. What they also need to do is that some of our healthcare institutions and our small businesses have been dramatically impacted negatively economically, beyond just the loss of sales or procedures that were done if we're talking healthcare facilities, but also the cost of having to provide protective equipment for their employees, the cost of testing. All of those things are incredibly impactful. And there's a whole range of other things that we don't have time to really discuss. So if the state can provide either, zero interest loans or grants or low interest loans to make sure that those small businesses, those healthcare facilities have a fighting chance. I think that's something that they can do. We're all hoping, I think, for assistance from the federal government that we assumed would have come and has not. We have to keep advocating for that, but we can't plan on it. That's one thing that I think the state can do, is to make sure that the facilities have the either the physical PPE that they need, but additionally the funds that they need, or the ability to make sure that the tests are available, they have them, and the protective equipment is available.
Now, in terms of the economic side of it, certainly there's an impact on businesses here, an impact on workers. People are unemployed. There's businesses that, if they are open, they're certainly struggling, or at worst, we've seen some businesses close as a result of this. What do you view, the state's role in, and what would you support to help businesses and workers who have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yes, well, as I stated in the past question, we have to continue to advocate for federal stimulus dollars. The chain reaction that has already started to occur is really a scary one, which is that municipalities don't have the money. They have to make cuts to their employees for the number of employees. The services goes down, those employee families are going down. They're not spending the money like they used to. And the snowball's effect of a lack of tax revenue is scary. We can't rush to just push in the door and open up every business with no restrictions, because what the virus is dictating is that we can't do that. Economically, that's going to be a much bigger problem down the road. So we have to continue to advocate for federal dollars. I know that we have to support our communities in every way that we can. I plan to be elected to office, and when I'm in the Senate majority, that's the chamber where they're going to be making legislative decisions, and they're going to be making budgetary decisions. And we have to make sure that the 50th Senate District, the counties of Onondaga and Cayuga, are a priority. And one way to assure that they're a priority, and also one way to assure that they may not be a priority, we have to make sure that we have a representative in the majority. The Senate dynamic is such that there's 40 Republicans and 20 Democrats. Upwards of 10 Republicans that were in that conference have retired. And therefore, it's going to be very challenging for the Republicans to pick up any seats. So the Democrats are going to make those decisions in that conference. And if we have somebody in the minority conference, and we've just spent a year with no one in either conference, I will be there and be a strong advocate. Another thing related to the lack of having a senator over the course of this year is I've had conversations with different organizations, some of them needing grants and loans for infrastructure. These are DASNY grants, and they're signed and ready to go, but we're never brought back. So the money is still there. We got to go get it while it's still available, so that people can fix their leaky roofs and can rebuild their walkways, things like that. That is a way that it is going to be something to help support, our small businesses and our communities.
Just to correct you, I know you know the number, but it's 40 Democrats and 20.
Did I flip them?
You did flip them, I think. So we'll
it's
have
a good
to.
thing this isn't live.
Hey, it's been a earlier Dia Carbajal had some internet issues live, right. So that's what we're here for. So wanted to discuss taxes as well, because certainly tax revenue has been affected by the pandemic as well, for many of the reasons that we've already discussed. But wanted to also get into a broader discussion about tax policy, because of course, as certainly school taxes are factored into that, property taxes broadly. Then you get into income taxes, state taxes. So looking at tax policy generally, what do you think needs to change with the state's tax structure?
Sure. Well, I certainly would agree that there's room for improvement. We've talked in the past about school funding, and how a big chunk of that is tied to property taxes. Not a lot of other places do it that way. But if we can just kind of look at the big picture here, I would say we are going to be in a crisis economically here in New York State. We are going to have to take a strong look at both sides of the budget, and that includes on one side looking for waste or duplication of services within the system. But on the other side, we're going to have to make sure that dollars are flowing into the state coffers. I support the legalization and taxation of marijuana. I think there's great consensus that there's support for that. Its use is prevalent. Its availability is easy, and there are many other states or countries around where people can access it. I also am supportive of mobile sports betting. And then finally, if you look at the tax codes over the course of 2 generations, the ultra rich or the 1% of the 1% have done very well. If we make an adjustment to those tax codes, it shouldn't be that, well, you can't go anywhere near that. If you look at what the tax codes look like in the 70s, it's been very favorable for the ultra wealthy. And therefore, if we just bring that back a little bit on some of our wealthiest New Yorkers that are not in our district, they're in other districts downstate, mostly in this state. I think it's fair to look at that, because I know this: we can't balance the budget on the backs of school children. We can't balance this budget on the backs of healthcare facilities, and we can't balance the budget on the backs of property owners and hardworking people in the middle class that are doing the work. So therefore, I think it's only reasonable that we just make a small adjustment to the very top earners in this state. I have said this, and I stand by this. It makes an impact on me that in 1973, the average CEO made 37 times more than the average worker. And people were outraged at that. And I was a young person at that time, but I think back on it, and I can remember those conversations on TV. Now, where are we? Not 37 times more, over 400 times more. That lets you know that the wealthy, including during this pandemic, are doing very well. And if we're all in this together, they can do a little bit more. They can do their fair share.
With education, because I know that this is a subject in your wheelhouse, obviously, you've seen the effects of the school aid formula firsthand, how that can affect, not only a school's funding, but what it can provide. So, what needs to change with the formula, and how quickly do you think we can change it? Because I know in interviewing people in your position and people who become state legislators, it's something that it seems that there's a consensus that it needs to change. It just doesn't happen. So, what's it going to take to finally get this done?
Right. I think it's going to take courage, because we've already tried legislation. We've already tried litigating it. We've had, groups going around the state now, which I believe is encouraging, a task force of senators that are part of the education committee that say we've got to get this right. So what's awful, and in Auburn, in large city school district is a great example, is that the problems compound themselves. If the formula is broken, it's broken every year. It is a complex formula. I've sat in workshops and listened to it explained to me. It doesn't seem to really make a lot of sense. So I think there's people in office right now in the New York State Senate that are taking it seriously. We're in a dynamic budget time, so it's going to be hard to make dramatic changes. But the children of New York State, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, are suffering when it comes to funding. It's going to take courage to make those changes, because some districts that are doing very well are probably going to be impacted, and they may not be able to offer Mandarin as a language choice for their students. But that's the level of disparity where we're at across the state. It is determined by zip code, and it shouldn't be. Every New York student should have the same opportunities that any other does.
On economic development, this is something we we've certainly seen a lot of progress here in central New York. I know here in Cuyahoga County, we've had a lot of success stories. Courier Plastics has expanded. We have the Cuyahoga Milk Plant is another example. Certainly with those success stories come some of the flaws with these programs that we've seen across the state. So, in terms of economic development, what would you like to see from the state level to support, businesses that are here, help create new businesses, that I guess we get into that question again of distribution of aid.
Sure. So I was born here in Syracuse, New York, and I grew up just around Tipperary Hill and have lived just outside of the city for my entire adult life. I love it here. We have tremendous resources, tremendous natural resources, transportation systems, educational institutions, healthcare institutions, and agriculture and others. So we have a lot of positives. And I know that we have to continue to engage with our great employers that are really wonderful, not just stewards of the environment, but stewards of our community. So we got to keep that conversation going. We can't have an economic climate that is negative. And we know that we have challenges here when it comes to energy costs. And part of the reason we handled this pandemic so well is because we have systems in place. They've been there for a long time that are funded by our tax dollars that make sure that we get things done and we keep this virus under control. It reminds me, people always get upset with their taxes, and we pay higher taxes here in New York State. We do, but we get a lot out of it. We get a great higher education system, which you can, and the SUNY system is amazing. You can take, you want to be anything in this world, you go to a SUNY school and you can be that. But to go back to our economic development concerns, we need greater oversight. What I've seen in Auburn is a well-developed long-term plan to gain some of those grants, and they got them, and they deserved it. And that was fantastic. What we've seen other places in the state in the not so distant past is that there wasn't enough oversight. It wasn't a fair fight. And as a result, dollars went in the wrong direction. And actually, there were some bad actors there where the courts had to get involved. So we need greater oversight. I have great respect for the comptroller and his office. And I would be supportive of making sure that whenever public dollars are spent, there's tremendous oversight, and the comptroller's office should be a part of that to a greater degree.
Bail reform, I know, is an issue that's been raised in a lot of races this year, including your own. It seems that starting with the idea of reforming the bail system, that there's certainly agreement there that the system before was broken. The debate comes in, what the fix was, or what the supposed fix was. And I know that there's been a lot of criticism of this. There's also a lot of support for it, because it certainly changes the makeup of the bail system compared to what it existed before, what it was like before. So, in terms of this debate, where do you stand on bail reform, and do you think that there's any improvements that need to be made to the current law, which has it took effect in January and has since been amended during the budget process?
Right. So I agree that there was great consensus that cash bail, as part of criminal justice reform, cash bail had to be addressed. There can be some, not out of your newsroom, Robert, but there can be some inflammatory articles that are out there with some headlines that really sort of rile people up, and that people are just being left out, are just being released. So we're talking about pretrial detention. Whether I've talked and had great conversations with many groups, the district attorney's office, leaders in law enforcement, advocates for criminal justice reform, community members, everybody agreed we've got to change this. This isn't working. It's broken. It's unfair. There's two different systems. If somebody can write a $1,000 check, or the Harvey Weinsteins of the world can write $1 million checks and walk out the door, and somebody who is innocent, has not faced trial yet, but can't post bail, is stuck in jail, it's wrong. And there was great agreement about that. Yes, we went through, the state went through and passed criminal justice reform bills. I was having conversations, including with local police in Auburn. Prior to that, I had conversations with them after that, and they were great conversations. We have to make sure we continue to engage law enforcement, community members, and make sure that we get this right. And I think there's still a lot of people out there that say we can do better. When the reforms came to the reforms, the 50th Senate District lacked a state senator. So I do think that there were positive changes that had occurred there, and there's more to be done. Right now, the political climate is such that people are just, yelling at each other and pointing fingers. And we need to come together and go, okay, we need safe communities. All of our communities need to be safe. How are we going to achieve that? We do have to listen to our law enforcement members and law enforcement leaders, district attorneys' offices, and people who know we've lived in a two-tier system and figure out where can we make adjustments. And I hope to be a positive voice in bridging that gap. I have family members who are in law enforcement and a multitude of friends in it. It's a challenging job, and there's a small number of law enforcement that have painted law enforcement in a negative light. That's why I think everyone's calling for greater transparency, and they're calling for greater accountability. And I think that will restore some faith in our law enforcement because we need them.
You've mentioned, I know throughout this campaign, I think it goes back to when you first became a candidate again for this seat, that really the important thing is that this district has representation, because of course the 50th district has gone without a representative for the entirety of this calendar year, and will until the next senator is sworn in January. So with that, can you speak to the importance of having a representative, but also being able to represent a diverse district such as this one? Because certainly there's rural areas, there's suburban areas, and then there's urban areas as well with the city of Auburn. So, how would you approach that responsibility as a state senator to represent such a diverse area?
Well, I feel very comfortable representing all of those three different types of places to live, So I grew up in the city of Syracuse. I understand what it's like and the challenges that there are in living in a city. I've grown up in the suburbs. I've taught in the suburbs that has some very rural areas. So we all have the same concerns, and then we've got some concerns that are unique. We all, want to make sure that our services are available to us. That's one. Number two, we want to make sure that our communities are safe. We want to make sure our environment is clean and that our schools give our kids a chance to compete with anybody. And I think we've done a pretty good job of all of those things. So what it comes down to is not disconnecting from your community members. So if I'm one of the decision makers and I take my job seriously, I continue to engage with all groups. And I promise to do that.
And then to close our chat here, what's your pitch to voters in terms of why you would be the best choice for them? Obviously voting is ongoing with the absentee process. We got early voting, not to get ahead of my closing, but we got early voting starting up at the end of this week, and then of course election day. So voting is underway, and in-person voting is going to start later this week. So what's your message to voters as to why you're the best choice in the 50th?
So, Robert, I've had a great career that I love, and I'm not ready to leave. I love being in the classroom. I think my connection to kids, I get to see what our community is like better than almost any other profession or member of the community, because I get to interact with the community, the good and the bad, over a long period of time. I was born here in Central New York. I've lived here my whole life. I love it here. Like a lot of us, I had a great deal of frustration with our current political climate. I've had a great career. I'm not looking for another second career. I'm 52 years old. I love what I do. I have a great life. I'm upsetting my own family's apple cart and my own career's apple cart to do this because I believe we can do better. I think that the climate that we're in is not a healthy one. And I know that, like, in the people that I represent in my school district, they're from a diversity of different political parties. I don't know what those parties are, and I don't act as their leader wondering what they are or assuming they're one or the other. I represent everybody. The 50th Senate District is always going to be, not always, but for a long time going forward, it's going to be split fairly evenly between the two major parties, and then almost an even split with people that are in third parties or they don't have any party affiliation. I feel strongly about representing all of them. But I know this, we're at a critical time, and we need someone in the majority because that's where things get done. All right? It just is the reality of it. That's the current dynamic. I love Central New York, and I want to make sure that we bring back our fair share so that our communities can thrive. And they can thrive, like I said, in a bunch of different ways. We have to make sure we support the economic growth of our community so people continue to stay, my kids and my grandkids and other people continue to move in the area. So my heart is in it. It's in it for the right reasons. I love it here. I'm putting forth a lot of, I'm putting a lot of chips on the table as a result of leaving one career and going into another, because I feel very strongly that we can do better. We have to restore faith in our elected leaders and our governance. We do that with integrity, consistency, and honesty. And I think I bring all three of those things.
With that, a reminder that absentee voting is ongoing. You can still submit an application. I think you had about a week to do that. I better look up that deadline for people and share that with them. And then early voting begins on Saturday. So in Onondaga County, there are 6 sites, I believe. In Cuyahoga County, we have 3 sites. So those are the 2 counties in the district where you can vote in the 50th and other races, of course, presidential race among others. And then election day is on Tuesday, November 3rd. So John Mannion, thanks so much for joining me this evening. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Robert. It was a pleasure. Have a great night.